start off with the story. This is just a disclaimer. I enjoy reading, listening to and writing crime stories and mystery stories as well. And this specific story, it's purely fiction and it's purely for entertainment purposes only. So none of it's true, and just enjoy it. As the first rays of light peered through the rickety, half-broken windows of a dusty, run-down cottage, Osheen, who was sleeping on the floor of a large room presumed to be the living room since it had a sofa in it, stirred awake. Osheen rubbed his eyes as he sat up. He looked thoroughly around the room as though he was expecting someone to be there. Once he noticed that the coast was clear, he stood up and walked towards the window. He then peered out of the cottage, scanning his surroundings, and he noticed that he was in the middle of nowhere. So, as Osheen continued looking around, he finally laid his eyes on an abandoned car. He dashed outside, opened the door, got in, and fortunately for him, the car was an automatic one. He started the engine and began driving on the sandy road that seemed to be the only way out of the grassy lands of nothingness that surrounded him. He continued driving as fast as he could, occasionally glancing at the fuel gauge to see if there was enough petrol left. Finally, Osheen began to see people. Laughing, talking, walking. Well, he was confused and scared, and he wanted closure. He wanted to know why he was where he was. Of course, he remembered some parts of the previous night, yet they seemed too horrifying and morbid to be true. Osheen stopped the car near some place that seemed to be a cafe. Then he entered the place. The thing was, he had no money on him, and everything around him was ever so foreign. The clothes, the language, and even the way the houses were built. They looked like they were built from a fairy tale. However, a thing to mention would be that despite the language being ever so foreign to him, Osheen could understand and speak it fluently. Once Osheen entered the cafe, he walked up to the counter and asked the cashier where he was. The cashier laughed, obviously, because who in their right mind would come up to a cashier and inquire about where they were? Anyway, the cashier told him that they were in Crimsonville. And she also said, "You seem to be wary of your surroundings. The police station is just a few meters away from here. Drive straight and turn left. Once you get there, ask for a detective named Leonard Harlington. He's the only person capable of helping you." Osheen was still skeptical about what was going on around him. However, he took his cashier's advice and drove to the police station. Once he arrived, he met a female police officer and asked to meet with Leonard Harlington. Osheen was told that Detective Harlington was busy at the moment, and therefore he would have to wait for some time in order to meet him. Osheen waited. Every police officer who passed by him would look at him with either pitiful or curious looks. It made Osheen feel uneasy. Seconds became minutes, minutes became hours, and finally, 3 hours later, a young detective, around the same age as Osheen, walked up to him. Osheen stood up with a smile to greet the detective. The detective wore a glittery black suit, shiny, well-polished black shoes, and his hair was neatly styled in a way so that it complemented his crystal blue eyes. Osheen noticed Leonard scanning him thoroughly, as though he was a product to be tested. The man finally introduced himself to Osheen as Leonard Harlington, the renowned detective of Crimsonville. And for some strange reason, Osheen felt relieved, in a way that he himself couldn't comprehend. He felt as though he was finally going to get the answers he needed, as though he would finally be able to return home. Unbeknownst to him, Leonard noticed that Osheen was zoning off, so he snapped his fingers next to Osheen's ears to bring him back to reality. Osheen shook his head and asked, "Where is this? I can't remember where my home is, I can't remember my address or my family or who I am," or Leonard interrupted him. "Since you have nowhere to go and no recollection of your past, why don't you work for me?" Before Osheen could say no, Leonard added, "You don't have any money to pay me with, do you? You help me with my other cases and I will help you with yours. How does that sound?" Osheen reluctantly agreed. He would rather read a boring book on the end of the world than work for a detective, but he wanted to go home, and deep inside, he knew that this detective could help him. He seemed capable enough. When Leonard and Osheen were finally alone in Leonard's office, Leonard mentioned how he felt jaded about the fact that it was always him who solved all the major cases. And the there was no one willing to assist him due to his weird investigation methods. However, with Austin around, Leonard said that his career would be much more interesting. Soon, Austin moved in with Leonard, who lived in a mediocre house in the center of Crimsonville. Although Leonard kept insisting that he was trying his best to dig into Austin's past, Austin felt as though Leonard was not really investigating anything about him. However, Austin remained silent about his doubts. Not long after they began living together, Austin was faced with his first case with Leonard. A murder. One Saturday night at 10 o'clock, a middle-aged woman pounded on Leonard's door. Austin answered the door since Leonard was in the bathroom at the time. The woman was dressed in a blue nightgown and her eyes read of bewilderment, terror, and desperation. The moonlight shone on Leonard's doorstep, giving off an eerie, sinister feeling. Austin invited the lady into Leonard's house and handed her a cup of coffee. Leonard entered the living room where the lady was seated. By the time Austin handed the lady the cup of coffee, once Austin and Leonard were comfortably seated as well, Leonard initiated the conversation by inquiring what the lady's name was and what brought her to his house. "My name is Isla Harper. It's my husband," the lady replied, her voice trembling. "He went missing 2 weeks ago. You might be aware of this matter?" Leonard nodded his head and Austin followed suit. "Did he return?" Leonard asked. The lady, Isla, nodded her head and continued. "He returned all right. At least his body did." Upon hearing the word body, Austin felt a cold shiver run down his spine, and Isla kept going, now in tears. "His body, his lifeless, dead, cold body, was dumped on my doorstep sometime in the evening." Austin handed Isla a tissue. Lena then asked Isla how she knew the precise time when her husband's body was dumped on the doorstep, and she explained that it was dumped there sometime after she returned home after she bought her groceries and before she decided to head back to meet with her neighbors. She mentioned how there were several stab wounds on her late husband's chest. Around 10, according to the police. "Is the body still there? Was it decomposed?" Lena inquired. Isla shook her head. "It looked as though my husband only died yesterday. His body was intact. The police took it away." "Did he have any enemies?" Austin asked. Isla shook her head once more before she finally realized, "Oh, actually, there is one person who I presume hated my late husband. His name is Carl Sinclair, and he's a businessman, just like my late husband was. However, they were merely business rivals, nothing more." Leonard assured that he would get to the bottom of the case, and Austin then decided to walk with Isla back to her home in order to get pictures of where the body was found. As Austin was out with Isla, Leonard too left his house and visited a journalist, James. So, Leonard told James to publicly reveal the case, which James was understandably hesitant because the murderer was still out and running. If the murderer found out that he leaked any news about the case, he could potentially get killed. However, once Leonard promised him a good sum of money, James agreed to release news of the case the very next day. The next day, Leonard paid a visit to the police station with Austin. He met with the lead investigator of the case, and they spoke for nearly an hour or so while Austin stayed out of the room trying his best to eavesdrop on what they were discussing. When Leonard finally came out, he updated Austin on the case. The police had obtained CCTV footage from some of the CCTV cameras on the street of a van parking in front of Isla Harper's house, dragging her late husband's body out of the trunk of his van and leaving it on the doorstep before rushing back to the van and driving away. Unfortunately, the van had no number plate, and the perpetrator was wearing a hoodie that was pulled down to cover his entire face, and he also wore rubber gloves. I've asked them to check all the CCTV footages over the past week, Lena told Austin. If the murderer was so confident enough to drop the body on the doorstep at that particular time, he probably observed the neighborhood for quite a while. So we may be able to catch him by observing the previous footages. And that's it? Austin inquired. Then is the case solved? I can't say for sure. After all, the police did find Isla's fingerprints on a clean area of the victim's arm where no blood had poured. Of course, this doesn't point to Isla as being the murderer in any way at all because she is his wife. However, it does raise some suspicions. Ultimately, the police located the murderer. Charles, in his house not too far from Isla's. Leonard was right about the possibility of identifying the killer by observing the older CCTV footages. In Charles's apartment, there was an ice cream freezer, and apparently, Jonathan's body was stored in it. In addition, Jonathan's blood was found in Charles's bathroom, along with the kitchen knife still covered in brown blood. By this time, the media and several other citizens had gotten involved, since it was not every day when someone would find a dead body lying on somebody's doorstep. In addition, most of them had already read James's article regarding the case. However, Charles's interrogations with the investigators were leaving room for several other questions and speculations. Charles broke down and mentioned that somebody hired him to kill Mr. Harper, Isla's husband, Mr. Jonathan Harper. However, he wouldn't reveal the name of that person. The police confirmed that an anonymous account had transferred a large sum of money to Charles 1 week prior to Jonathan's disappearance. Citizens of Crimsonville and the media speculated that it was probably Carl Sinclair who hired Charles to kill Jonathan. However, the story was soon brushed off, since Leonard claimed that other than losing a business rival, Carl had nothing else to gain from murdering Jonathan Harper. Then, the blame shifted to Isla Harper, and this time, even Osheen was on board with the claims. People came out with the analysis that Isla could have paid to get her husband killed in order to inherit his life insurance and business that she was sure he might have left for her. Unbeknownst to her, her life insurance was left not to her but to his younger brother, James, the journalist, and his business was also to be handed over to James. This was because, according to James, Jonathan valued his birth relatives, as in his parents and brother, more than he valued his wife. That was the only reason, James speculated, that could explain why Jonathan left his entire life savings to him. With all the negative assumptions about Isla being the mastermind behind her husband's murder making headlines, the investigators brought her in for questioning as well. It was not like a normal interrogation, though she wasn't a major suspect yet. The police was just asking her simple questions, as though they were having a friendly conversation with her. Osheen and Leonard remained outside the police station, eating ice cream. Didn't Isla cry though? Osheen reminded Leonard. She cried over her husband's death. There were tears. Maybe it was too late, Leonard explained. Maybe if she was the real person who planned his death, she probably realized that she wasn't getting any money from him only after his death. And thus she probably came to the realization that she had just lost her husband and wasn't getting a cent from him either. Osheen and Leonard decided to head back home, as staying in front of the police station for so long was just going to be a waste of time. The next day, the lead investigator of the case updated Osheen on the case. 20 minutes into the investigation, Isla had broken down, and she finally confessed that she paid Charles to kill her late husband, Jonathan. She took her husband on a visit to the park in the middle of the night. Afterwards, she excused herself to go to the bathroom after making sure that there was no one else around them. Shortly after she left, Charles crept up behind Jonathan and gagged him. Afterwards, Charles took Jonathan to his apartment in his van and killed him in his apartment bathroom. Under Isla's orders, Charles had to keep Jonathan's body in his apartment in an ice cream freezer to prevent it from decomposing until Isla told him that he could just discard the body. In the meantime, Isla found out that her husband's life insurance and business were not left for her, but instead to his brother, James. The news shattered her heart. Not only was she not going to inherit any of her husband's money, but she was most likely going to be penniless, since throughout the entirety of her marriage, Isla had not been working and relied heavily on her husband's finances to carry on with her life. When Isla found out about this, she pondered over what to do for nearly a week, until finally, after Charles had complained to her multiple times about how he hated keeping the body in his apartment, she instructed him to dump the body on her doorstep. She provided him with the time when he could safely do so to avoid the neighbors' unwanted attention. Although Charles was provided with the time when to leave the body on the doorstep, he wanted to be extra cautious and therefore observed the neighborhood for around a week before completing the task. Austin was baffled. Forget the wife. He couldn't even imagine why anyone would have the conscience to kill someone who couldn't have been more innocent, even if that person was paid handsomely for it. At this point in time, Austin, the lead investigator, and Leonard were seated in Leonard's living room, with teacups filled with cold tea which were placed on the tea table. Austin glanced towards Leonard. While Austin and the lead investigator sat next to each other on the same sofa, Leonard sat in an armchair. While Austin felt disgusted as to why a wife would kill her husband purely for his life insurance and business, Leonard sat with his head slightly bent, staring into nothingness. The case was solved. 2 days later, after everything had been settled, sometime in the afternoon, Austin started a conversation with Leonard. "Can you help me now?" Austin asked the detective. Instead of providing Austin with a steady, clear answer, Leonard smiled. He annoyed Austin. He was feeling desperate now, desperate to know how he got there, where he was from, and most importantly, who he was. Before Austin could say anything else, Leonard walked towards him and snapped his fingers next to Austin's right ear. Every single object around Austin became pixelated, and soon his surroundings grew dark, black. Austin blinked his eyes twice, and when his vision finally adjusted to the blinding light that surrounded him, he noticed how he was in a medium-sized room which had white walls, and he was lying on a white hospital bed. A man, dressed in white, walked up to him. Austin was still lying down on the bed. His eyes scanned the man who stood in front of him. The stranger's white garments made it hard to read his character. Anyhow, on top of the white clothing on the top left corner near the breast pocket area is a police badge, and in the stranger's right hand is a pair of handcuffs. The stranger finally says, "Charles Austin Harper, you are under arrest for killing Mr. Jonathan Harper as a contract killer." Suddenly, it hits him. He isn't Austin. His real name is Charles. Austin is his second name, his middle name. While he just experienced the crime, him interacting with Leonard, it was all part of virtual reality. In reality, Austin, Charles, had killed a man named Jonathan Harper after being hired to do so by his victim's wife. He accepted the request eagerly. He, to put it simply, wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. However, when Charles was arrested, he didn't say anything. He wouldn't confess to the murder. So the police decided to recreate what they presumed might have happened according to all the evidence they had collected in virtual reality. Then they sent Charles into it, allowing him to view the gravity of the crime he committed. As a different person, Austin, an onlooker, instead of being the murderer himself. In addition, they sent another detective, Leonard, so that everything that happened within the world of virtual reality would be supervised. When Charles realized all this, he was astounded and amazed by what the detectives had done, that he could do nothing but confess. Ultimately, he received a total of 70 years of imprisonment without the possibility of parole, while Isla received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Although logically speaking, Charles should have been sad or satisfied even, since after all he did kill for the pure purpose of experiencing such emotions, he was confused. His experience in the world of virtual reality changed him. It not only made him feel guilty, but also changed his perspective of certain things. However, most likely and rather unfortunately, Charles was not going to get a second chance in life. Thank you.